when a blood-soaked woman stumbled into Caleb Ward's isolated cabin, clutching a mysterious cloth to her chest and begging him not to look beneath it. He thought he was saving a stranger. But when that cloth finally fell away, it revealed a truth so devastating it would shatter everything he believed about his past and forge a bond that would either redeem them both or destroy them forever. Welcome to a story of survival, redemption, and the unbreakable threads that bind us across time and tragedy. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment with your city so I can see how far this tale of hope has traveled around the world. The Arizona sun had no mercy even as it began its descent toward the jagged horizon. Heat waves shimmered off the red rocks like ghostly dancers, and the silence of the high desert was so complete it seemed to press against a man's eardrums. In this vast emptiness, where most folks figured nothing could survive except scorpions and rattlesnakes, Caleb Ward had built himself a sanctuary of solitude. His cabin sat tucked into a natural depression between two towering mesas, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. The structure was rough-hewn but solid-built, with the kind of careful attention that spoke of a man who had nowhere else to go and all the time in the world to get it right. Weathered cedar logs chinked with red clay, a stone chimney that drew clean, and a porch that wrapped around three sides, offering shade and a clear view of any approach. Caleb stood on that porch now, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At 32, he carried himself like a man much older, his broad shoulders permanently hunched as if braced against an invisible weight. His dark hair hung past his collar, shot through with premature gray at the temples, and his blue eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from seeing too much and forgetting too little. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw told part of his story. The rest was written in the careful way he moved, favoring his right leg and the unconscious habit he had of checking the shadows before stepping into sunlight. 3 years he'd been hiding in these hills, 3 years since he'd walked away from everything that had once defined him. 3 years of telling himself that solitude was healing when what it really was penance. The horse appeared first, a dark speck moving against the red rocks below. Caleb's hand went instinctively to the Winchester leaning against the porch rail, his body shifting into the alert stillness of a predator. Visitors were rare out here, and in his experience, rare meant dangerous. But as the speck grew larger, details emerged that made his blood run cold. The horse was running wild foam, flecking its sides, reins trailing in the dust, and clinging to its back, barely conscious, was a figure in torn clothing that might once have been white. Caleb watched for a long moment, coffee cup forgotten in his hands. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, to let whoever it was ride on past his hidden sanctuary. He'd learned the hard way that other people's troubles had a way of becoming his own, and he'd paid too high a price for heroism to be tempted by it again. But then the horse stumbled and the rider pitched forward, small hands clutching desperately at the animal's mane. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the dark stains on that white fabric, could tell that whoever was up there was barely hanging on. "Damn," he muttered, setting down his cup with more force than necessary. His conscience, which he'd thought he'd successfully buried along with everything else, stirred to life like an old wound in bad weather. The horse was heading for the narrow trail that led up to his cabin, probably following the scent of water from his spring. In 10 minutes, maybe less, horse and rider would collapse right on his doorstep, and then he'd have no choice but to get involved. Caleb grabbed his rifle and headed down the trail at a careful jog, his bad leg protesting every step. The desert heat hit him like a physical blow as he left the shade of the porch, but he pressed on, following the switchbacks that led down to the main canyon floor. He reached the bottom just as the horse gave out. The animal went down hard, rolling to one side, and its rider was thrown clear, hitting the rocky ground with a sickening thud. The horse thrashed once, twice, then lay still, its sides heaving with exhaustion. The rider didn't move at all. Caleb approached cautiously, rifle-ready eyes, scanning the surrounding rocks for any sign of pursuit. Up close, he could see that the rider was a woman, young from the look of her, with dark hair matted with sweat and blood. Her dress, what was left of it, had indeed once been white, but now it was stained with dirt and worse things. Her feet were bare and bloody, and angry red welts marked her wrists where rope had bitten deep. She was unconscious, but breathing, and as Caleb knelt beside her, he could see the rise and fall of her chest beneath the torn fabric. That was when he noticed what she was clutching against her body, a piece of cloth, dark with old blood wrapped around something that she held like her life depended on it. "Easy there," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "Let's see how bad you're hurt." He started to reach for the cloth, thinking it might be covering a wound that needed tending, but even unconscious, her grip tightened. Her lips moved, forming words too faint to hear, but the desperation in the sound was unmistakable. Caleb sat back on his heels, studying her face. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 20 or 21, with the kind of delicate features that spoke of gentle breeding. But there was steel beneath that fragility. She'd have to be tough as rawhide to survive whatever had brought her to his doorstep. A distant sound made him freeze, the drumming of hooves, still far off but getting closer, multiple horses moving fast. Whoever was chasing this woman, they weren't giving up easy. Caleb made his decision in that instant and immediately regretted it. But regret was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. He slipped his arms under the woman's body, lifting her as gently as he could manage. She was lighter than he'd expected, all bird bones and sharp angles, and the way she unconsciously curled against his chest told him she'd been running on nothing but determination for God knew how long. The climb back to the cabin was pure hell. His bad legs screamed with every step, and the woman's dead weight threw off his balance on the narrow trail. Twice he had to stop and rest, pressing his back against the rock wall while he caught his breath and listened for sounds of pursuit. By the time he reached the cabin, sweat was pouring down his face and his vision was starting to gray at the edges. He kicked open the door and carried her straight to his bedroom, laying her down on the narrow bed with as much care as he could manage. In the better light of the cabin, the extent of her injuries became clear. The welts on her wrists were the least of it. Her dress was torn across the back, revealing long, angry marks that could only have come from a whip. Some were fresh, still seeping blood, but others were older, partially healed, telling a story of systematic brutality that made Caleb's jaw clench with remembered rage. But it was what she was still clutching to her chest that puzzled him most. The cloth was stained and dirty, wrapped around something rectangular and flat. Papers, maybe, or a book. Whatever it was, she'd protected it with her body, and even now, unconscious and broken, she wouldn't let it go. "What have you got there, girl?" he wondered aloud, but made no move to take it from her. If she'd guarded it this fiercely, it was probably the only thing between her and something worse than death. The sound of hooves was getting closer now, echoing off the canyon walls. Caleb moved to the window and peered through the gap between the boards he'd nailed over the glass. Down in the canyon, he could see them, 6 riders in dark clothing, moving in the organized pattern of a military unit. They'd found the collapsed horse, and now they were spreading out, searching. One of them dismounted and knelt beside the dead animal, examining the ground with the practiced eye of a tracker. When he stood, he pointed directly toward the trail that led to Caleb's cabin. "Son of a bitch," Caleb breathed. He'd hoped the rocky ground would hide their tracks, but apparently whoever these men were, they knew their business. He turned back to the woman on his bed. She was starting to stir, her head moving restlessly from side to side, soft moans escaping her lips. Whatever dreams she was having, they weren't pleasant ones. "Wake up," Caleb said quietly, touching her shoulder. "Come on, we need to move." Her eyes flew open, and for a moment they were wild with terror, not seeing him, but something else, something that made her try to scramble away despite her injuries. Caleb held up his hands, keeping his voice low and calm. "Easy. You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She blinked, and slowly the present came back into focus. Her eyes were green. He noticed the color of deep water, and they held an intelligence that the rest of her battered appearance might have hidden. She looked around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the simple furniture, the rifle mounted above the fireplace. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, throat raw from screaming or thirst, or both. "My place," Caleb said. "You collapsed down in the canyon. I brought you up here." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillow. That was when she seemed to remember what she was holding, and her arms tightened around the wrapped bundle. "They're coming," she said, and now there was urgency in her voice despite its weakness. "The riders, they'll kill you if they find me here." "Let me worry about that," Caleb said. "What's your name?" She hesitated, as if even that simple information might be dangerous. "Anna," she said finally. "Anna Hayes." "I'm Caleb Ward. And you're right about those riders. I can see them from the window. What did you do to get them so riled up?" Anna's laugh was bitter and broken. "I ran away," she said, "from a place where running away is the only crime that matters." Before Caleb could ask what she meant, the sound of boots on his porch made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps, more than one man moving with military precision. A fist pounded on his door, and a voice called out with the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "Open up in there. We're looking for a runaway, and we've got reason to believe she came this way." Caleb looked at Anna, saw the terror that flooded her face the way she clutched that mysterious bundle even tighter. Whatever she was running from, it was bad enough to make death seem like the better option. He made his second decision of the day, and like the first, he knew he'd probably live to regret it. But a man had to draw the line somewhere, and he'd drawn his right here in this moment. With this broken woman who'd stumbled into his life like a message from a past he couldn't escape. "Stay here," he told Anna quietly. "Don't make a sound no matter what you hear." He closed the bedroom door behind him and walked to the front of the cabin, taking his time, letting them know he wasn't impressed by their pounding or their demands. When he opened the door, he kept his body in the frame, blocking their view of the interior. There were 3 of them on his porch, and they weren't cowboys or drifters or any other kind of legitimate travelers. They were soldiers, or had been once wearing the hard-eyed look of men who followed orders without asking questions. Their leader was a big man with graying hair and sergeant stripes sewn to his shirt, the kind of non-com who'd learned his trade in the war and never quite figured out how to live without it. "Afternoon," Caleb said mildly. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" The sergeant looked him up and down, taking in the graying hair, the scar, the way Caleb favored his right leg. "You live out here alone?" "I do." "See anyone come through here today? Young woman, dark hair, probably injured." Caleb let the silence stretch out, studying each of their faces in turn. The sergeant was impatient but controlled. The man to his left was younger, nervous, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. The third was older, with dead eyes, and the kind of stillness that spoke of too many years doing dirty work. "Haven't seen anybody," Caleb said finally. "Don't get many visitors out here. Mind if we take a look around?" The sergeant's tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. "Actually, I do mind," Caleb said. "This is private property, and I don't recall inviting you boys up here." The sergeant's face darkened. "Now see here, mister. We're acting under the authority of Colonel Mercer, and we've got a dangerous fugitive on the loose. If you're harboring her, that makes you an accessory to theft." "Theft?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "What exactly did this woman steal?" "Herself," the older man said quietly, and there was something in the way he said it that made Caleb's blood run cold. "She's property of the Eagle Crest Mining Company, and property that runs away gets returned to its rightful owners." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Slavery had been outlawed for more than a decade, but out here in the territories, law was whatever the strongest man said it was. And if this Colonel Mercer was running some kind of forced labor operation... "I haven't seen any woman," Caleb repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd get off my land." The sergeant stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could smell the sweat and leather and gunpowder on him. "You sure about that, mister? Because lying to us would be a real bad idea." "I'm sure." For a long moment they stared at each other, and Caleb could feel the violence hanging in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. His hand was inches from the pistol on his hip, and he could see the sergeant measuring the distance, calculating odds. Then from somewhere behind the cabin came the sound of the horse nickering softly. The sergeant's head snapped up, and Caleb cursed silently. He'd forgotten about his own mount, probably smelling the strangers and getting restless in its paddock. "That your horse?" the sergeant asked. "It is." "Mind if we take a look at it? Woman we're chasing was riding a bay mare, and I'd hate to think you might have found it wandering around." Caleb wanted to refuse, but he could see the suspicion growing in their eyes. Better to show them his horse and maintain the fiction than to give them an excuse to search the cabin. "Help yourself," he said, stepping down off the porch. "Around back." They followed him to the small paddock he'd built behind the cabin, where his gelding stood in the shade of a lean-to shelter. It was clearly not the horse they were looking for, a big roan with white stockings, well-fed and calm. But as they stood there looking at the animal, the younger man's attention wandered to the cabin itself. Caleb saw his eyes narrow as he studied the structure and felt his heart sink as the man pointed to something near the back door. "Sergeant," the younger man said quietly, "take a look at this." They walked over to where he was pointing, and Caleb saw what had caught his attention. There in the soft earth beside his back steps was a partial footprint, Small, narrow, definitely made by a woman's bare foot. The sergeant knelt and studied the print, then looked up at Caleb with eyes gone hard as flint. "I thought you said you hadn't seen anybody." Caleb's mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation that might salvage the situation. But before he could speak, the older man with the dead eyes was already moving toward the cabin, his hand on his gun. "She's in there," he said with quiet certainty. "I can smell the blood." The sergeant stood slowly, his own weapon clearing leather with practiced ease. "Now that's real disappointing, friend. I was hoping we could handle this civilized-like." "Last chance," the younger man added, pointing his pistol at Caleb's chest. "Where is she?" Caleb looked at the 3 guns trained on him, calculated his chances, and found them wanting. But sometimes a man had to stand his ground regardless of the odds, especially when something more important than his own life was at stake. "I told you," he said quietly. "I haven't seen anybody." The sergeant nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "Charlie, go check the cabin. If she's in there, bring her out. If she gives you any trouble, shoot her in the leg. Colonel wants her breathing, but he didn't say she had to be walking." The younger man started toward the cabin, and Caleb knew he was out of time. In about 30 seconds, they'd find Anna, and whatever chance she had would be gone forever. He thought about the scars on her back, about the way she'd clutched that bundle to her chest, about the terror in her eyes when she'd heard them coming. He thought about Willow Creek. "Wait," he said, and all 3 men turned back to him. "There's something you should know." "What's that?" the sergeant asked. Caleb smiled, and it was the same smile he'd worn 12 years ago when he'd led his patrol into an Apache ambush rather than abandon the civilians they were protecting. It was the smile of a man who'd already decided he wasn't walking away from this one. "You picked the wrong cabin to threaten." His hand was already moving as he spoke, the Colt clearing leather with the fluid motion of countless hours of practice. The sergeant was fast, but Caleb was faster, and desperation gave him an edge that professional skill couldn't match. His first shot took the sergeant's center mass, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. His second caught the older man in the shoulder, sending his aim wide as he tried to return fire. The younger man got off a shot that buzzed past Caleb's ear before Caleb's third bullet found its mark. The gunfight lasted maybe 5 seconds from first shot to last, and when the smoke cleared, all 3 men were down. The sergeant was dead blood pooling beneath him in the dust. The older man was wounded but still moving, trying to crawl toward his dropped pistol. The younger one was sitting against the cabin wall, clutching his side and staring at Caleb with shocked eyes. "Jesus," the young man whispered. "Who the hell are you?" Caleb walked over and kicked the older man's gun out of reach, then knelt beside the wounded soldier. "I'm the man who's going to give you a choice," he said quietly. "You can ride out of here and tell your Colonel Mercer that you never found any trace of the woman you're hunting, or you can die here in the dirt beside your friends." The young man looked at his dead sergeant, at his wounded companion, at the steady gun in Caleb's hand. Whatever he saw there convinced him that this wasn't a bluff. We never found anything," he said through gritted teeth. "Track went cold down in the canyon." "That's right," Caleb agreed, "and it's going to stay cold. You understand me?" The young man nodded frantically. Caleb helped him to his feet, then did the same for the older man who was conscious but pale from blood loss. Between them, they managed to get the dead sergeant draped over his horse, and then Caleb watched as the 3 of them rode slowly down the trail and out of sight. Only when he was sure they were gone did he allow himself to sag against the cabin wall, the adrenaline draining out of him and leaving his hands shaking. He'd killed before too many times to count, but it never got easier, and it never stopped feeling like a piece of his soul had been carved away. He reloaded his pistol with mechanical precision, then walked back into the cabin. Anna was standing in the bedroom doorway, still clutching her mysterious bundle, her face white with shock. "You killed them," she said, and there was something like wonder in her voice. "You killed them for me." "I killed one of them," Caleb corrected. "The other 2 rode away with a story about how they never found you. Question is how long before they bring back more men with a different story." Anna closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there was a resolve there that transformed her entire face. "Not long," she said. "Colonel Mercer doesn't accept failure well. But maybe it doesn't matter." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she unwrapped the bundle she'd been guarding so fiercely. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellow with age and stained with what looked like blood. She held it out to him with hands that trembled slightly. "This is why they want me back," she said. "This is why they'll never stop hunting me, because what's written in here could destroy them all." Caleb took the ledger and opened it to a random page. What he saw there made his breath catch in his throat. Names, dates, purchases, and sales, all written in a careful, educated hand. But these weren't records of cattle or mining equipment. They were records of human beings bought and sold like livestock. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed. "How many?" 187, Anna said quietly. "Men, women, children, all of them trapped at Eagle Crest, all of them dying a little more each day. I managed to steal this from Mercer's office when I escaped, but I'm just one person. I can't save them all." Caleb flipped through more pages, seeing the same pattern repeated over and over. Names, ages, purchase prices, work assignments. Some entries were marked with red ink, presumably indicating death. There were too many of those. "Why?" he asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "Because slavery didn't really end," Anna said bitterly. "It just moved west and changed its name. Mercer calls it contract labor, but the contracts are written in chains and enforced with whips. People disappear from frontier towns. Travelers go missing on lonely roads, and they all end up in the same place working in Mercer's mines until they die." Caleb set the ledger down carefully, his mind reeling. He'd thought he'd left the war behind him, thought he'd found peace in these empty hills. But the war had followed him here, wearing a different face, but carrying the same old evils. "There's more," Anna continued. "That ledger only covers the main operation. Mercer has other camps, other mines. He's building an empire on the backs of stolen lives, and nobody knows because nobody who could stop him wants to believe it's happening." "What about the territorial authorities? Surely if someone brought proof—" Anna's laugh was bitter. "Half of them are in Mercer's pocket and the other half are too scared to act. He's got connections all the way back to Washington veterans from his old regiment who owe him favors. And he's got something else. He's got the location of every camp, every mine, every place where people are being held. If anyone moves against him openly, he'll just disappear into the wilderness with his slaves and they'll never be found." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, studying Anna's face in the lamplight. There was something she wasn't telling him, something that put a shadow in her eyes whenever she talked about Mercer. "How do you know all this?" he asked. "You weren't just another prisoner, were you?" Anna's composure finally cracked and tears began to slide down her cheeks. I was his personal servant, kept in the big house, treated better than the others because I could read and write and help him with his correspondence. I saw things, heard things. I knew what was happening, but I was too scared to do anything about it." "What changed?" "A little girl," Anna whispered. 7 years old, brought in with a group of travelers who'd been attacked on the road. She cried for her mother every night, and Mercer got tired of hearing it. He had her beaten, and when that didn't work— She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Caleb had seen enough of war to know where that story ended. "That's when I knew I had to do something," Anna continued. "I started planning, watching, waiting for my chance. It took me 3 months to figure out how to get into his office and steal the ledger, and when I finally ran, they caught you." "Almost. I made it further than I thought I would, but my horse gave out just when I thought I was safe. If you hadn't found me—" She shuddered, and Caleb could see in her eyes exactly what would have happened if those men had dragged her back to Eagle Crest. "Well, they didn't catch you," he said firmly. "Question is, what do we do now?" Anna looked at him in surprise. You said it yourself, you can't save those people alone. And this ledger, it's evidence, but it's not enough by itself. Mercer could claim it was forged or stolen by a disgruntled employee. You need someone with credibility. Someone who can make the authorities listen. And you think you're that someone?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking about the man he'd once been before Willow Creek, before the guilt and the grief had driven him into these hills. "Maybe," he said finally. "I've got contacts, people who might listen if I vouched for you, but it would mean leaving here, going back to places I swore I'd never see again. I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," Caleb said. "I'm volunteering. Those people in the mines, they deserve better than dying in the dark while the rest of us pretend it's not happening." Anna stared at him for a long moment as if trying to see into his soul. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you risk your life for strangers?" Caleb thought about Willow Creek again, about the faces that haunted his dreams, about the weight of failure he'd carried for 12 years. Maybe it was time to stop running from it. Maybe it was time to try to balance the scales. Because a long time ago, I failed to save people who were counting on me, he said quietly. Maybe this is my chance to get it right. Anna was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the lamplight. Finally, she nodded. All right, she said. But you need to understand, once we start this, there's no going back. Mercer won't stop hunting us, and he's got resources you can't imagine. Men, money, connections. He'll turn over every rock between here and Mexico to find us. Then we better make sure we stay ahead of him, Caleb said. How long do you think we have before those 2 men bring back reinforcements? Not long. Mercer keeps a full company of men at Eagle Crest, all of them ex-soldiers like those 3. When they don't report back by tomorrow morning, he'll send more. A lot more. Caleb nodded grimly. Then we leave tonight. I know these hills better than anyone, and there are trails that don't show up on any map. If we move fast and stay smart, we can put some distance between us and whatever's coming. Where will we go? There's a man I know, a sheriff named Sullivan down in Tucson. He's honest and he's got connections with the territorial government. If anyone can help us make this official, it's him. Anna clutched the ledger tighter. And if he won't listen, then we'll find someone who will, Caleb said. However long it takes, however far we have to run, those people in the mines have been waiting for someone to speak for them. I figure it's about time someone did. As if summoned by his words, the sound of distant gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, too far away to be an immediate threat, but close enough to be a reminder that their enemies were still out there, still hunting. They're searching the whole area, Anna said, moving to the window. Mercer must have sent out multiple teams. All the more reason to move fast, Caleb said. He began gathering supplies, ammunition, dried food, a canteen of water. Can you ride? If I have to. You'll have to. It's rough country between here and Tucson, and we'll need to stay off the main trails. Think you can handle it? Anna straightened, and despite her injuries, despite everything she'd been through, there was steel in her voice when she answered. I escaped from Eagle Crest, outran Mercer's best trackers, and survived 3 days in the desert with nothing but the clothes on my back. I think I can handle a horseback ride. Caleb smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. Yes, ma'am, I believe you can. As they prepared to leave, packing their few belongings and saddling Caleb's horse, Anna found herself studying the man who'd risked everything to save her. There was something about him, something in the way he moved and spoke that seemed familiar. But every time she tried to place it, the memory slipped away like smoke. Caleb, she said as they led the horse out of its paddock. What did you do before you came here, before you decided to live alone in the wilderness? He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. I was a soldier, he said. Cavalry. Spent the war fighting Confederates, spent the years after fighting Apaches. I was good at it, maybe too good. But there was this one mission. He trailed off, and Anna could see him wrestling with memories he'd rather leave buried. You don't have to tell me, she said gently. Maybe I do, Caleb said. Maybe it's time I told someone. There was a settlement, a place called Willow Creek. Apache raiders had been hitting farms in the area, and my patrol was sent to evacuate the civilians. But I made a mistake, trusted the wrong information, took the wrong trail. By the time we got there, he stopped walking, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. They were all dead, he finished quietly. Every last one of them, men, women, children, burned out, killed because I couldn't get there in time, because I failed them. Anna felt her heart clench with sympathy, but there was something else, something that made her blood run cold. Willow Creek, she repeated slowly. When was this? 12 years ago, spring of 1863. Why? The world seemed to tilt around Anna, and she had to grab the horse's saddle to keep from falling. 12 years ago, Willow Creek, a cavalry patrol that arrived too late. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God, I remember. Caleb turned to stare at her, seeing the recognition dawning in her eyes. What do you remember? The soldiers. Anna said, her voice barely audible. I remember the soldiers coming. I was hiding in the root cellar and I could hear them shouting, trying to find survivors. There was one voice calling out that it was safe to come out. She looked up at him and Caleb saw his own shock reflected in her eyes. You were there, she breathed. You were the one who found me. The memory hit Caleb like a physical blow. and suddenly he was 12 years old again, walking through the smoking ruins of Willow Creek, calling out for survivors he knew he wouldn't find. But there had been a little girl, barely 9 years old, hiding in a root cellar beneath what had once been the general store. "Clara," he whispered. "Your mother's name was Clara." Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She told me to hide no matter what I heard. I stayed in that cellar for 2 days before you found me. You carried me out, held me while I cried. You told me everything was going to be all right." "Anna Hayes," Caleb said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "You were Anna Hayes even then, Clara's daughter." "You saved my life," Anna said, "and now 12 years later you've saved it again." They stood there in the darkness, two people bound together by tragedy and time, by guilt and redemption, by the strange workings of fate that had brought them together in this place at this moment. "It wasn't your fault," Anna said quietly. "What happened at Willow Creek? My mother used to say that sometimes the world just goes dark and all we can do is try to light a candle against it. You lit a candle for me that day. You kept me alive when I wanted to die." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of guilt and pain that he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "I always wondered what happened to you," he said. "After we got you to the mission school, I wanted to visit, but you blamed yourself for not getting there sooner," Anna finished. "I understand. I blamed myself too for a long time, for hiding while my parents died, for not being brave enough to help them. You were 9 years old, and you were following orders, doing your duty. We both did what we had to do to survive." The sound of hoofbeats in the distance reminded them that this reunion, miraculous as it was, would have to wait. They had a long, dangerous road ahead of them, and somewhere behind them, Colonel Mercer's men were closing in. "We need to go," Caleb said, helping Anna onto the horse before swinging up behind her. "Where?" she asked, settling against him, as if 12 years hadn't passed since the last time he'd held her while she was scared and alone. "Toward morning," Caleb said, turning the horse toward the eastern trail. "Toward whatever's waiting for us out there." As they rode into the darkness, leaving behind the sanctuary that had been his home for 3 years, Caleb found himself thinking about the strange currents of fate that had brought them to this moment. He'd come to these hills to escape his past, but instead he'd found it waiting for him in the form of a woman who'd once been a frightened child he'd failed to save in time. Maybe redemption didn't come from running away from your failures. Maybe it came from facing them head-on, from standing up when it mattered most, from lighting that candle against the darkness, no matter how small and fragile it seemed. Behind them, the lights of pursuing riders began to appear in the canyon, and ahead of them lay a journey that would test them both in ways they couldn't imagine. But for the first time in 12 years, Caleb Ward felt like he was riding towards something instead of away from it. And beside him, Anna Hayes, the little girl he'd once carried from the ruins of her childhood, now a woman strong enough to steal from monsters and brave enough to run toward an uncertain future, clutched the ledger that might save 187 lives. The night was dark, and their enemies were many, but they rode on anyway, because sometimes the only choice left is to trust that morning will come, and that when it does, you'll be ready to meet whatever it brings. The eastern trail wound through a labyrinth of red stone and shadow, climbing steadily away from the valley floor where Caleb's cabin had stood. Behind them, the glow of torches marked their pursuers' progress, pinpricks of light that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The horse moved with sure-footed grace, despite the treacherous footing, but Caleb could feel the animal's strength beginning to flag under the double burden. Anna had grown quiet as they rode, her body tense against his chest whenever the sound of distant voices carried on the night wind. The ledger remained clutched in her arms, wrapped again in its protective cloth, and Caleb found himself wondering what other secrets it contained beyond the names of the enslaved. "They're gaining on us," Anna murmured as they paused at a rocky outcrop to rest the horse. Below them, the torches had spread out in a search pattern, methodically checking every canyon and draw. "Maybe," Caleb said, studying the terrain ahead, "but they don't know where we're going, and I do. There's a place about 2 hours from here, an old Apache camp in a box canyon. We can rest there until dawn, maybe lose them in the maze." Anna turned to look at him, her face pale in the starlight. "You seem to know a lot about Apache camps for a cavalry officer who fought them." Caleb's smile was grim. "After Willow Creek, I made it my business to understand my enemy. Spent months tracking them, learning their ways. Turned out they weren't so different from us, just trying to protect what was theirs from people who wanted to take it away." Is that when you stopped being a soldier? No, Caleb said quietly. That came later after I realized I was better at making war than making peace. The Apache knew when to stop fighting. I never learned that lesson. They rode on in silence after that, following trails that seemed to exist more in Caleb's memory than in any visible reality. The desert night was alive with sounds: the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through stone arches, the soft flutter of bats hunting insects. But underneath it all was the persistent drum of hoofbeats, never quite catching up, but never falling behind either. The box canyon appeared as a narrow crack in a towering cliff face, invisible until you were almost on top of it. Caleb guided the horse through the entrance, which was barely wide enough for a mounted rider, and into a hidden valley perhaps 100 yards across. Ancient petroglyphs decorated the walls, and the remains of old fires marked where Apache families had sheltered from storms and enemies. This should do, Caleb said, helping Anna down from the horse. They could ride past this place a dozen times and never see the entrance. Anna looked around the hidden sanctuary, taking in the evidence of previous occupants. How many people do you think found safety here over the years? Hundreds probably, maybe thousands. The Apache used this place for generations before we drove them out. Caleb began unsaddling the horse, his movements efficient despite his exhaustion. There's a spring back in those rocks and good grass for the horse. We can hold out here for a while if we need to. But even as he spoke, they both knew they couldn't stay long. Somewhere out there, Colonel Mercer was mobilizing his forces, and every hour they delayed was another hour for him to tighten the net around them. Anna settled beside the cold remains of an ancient fire still clutching the ledger. In the faint starlight filtering down through the canyon walls, Caleb could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her face, the way her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the precious book. "Tell me about him," Caleb said as he gathered wood for a small smokeless fire. "About Mercer. What kind of man are we dealing with?" Anna was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the ledger as if it might burst into flames. "He's intelligent," she said finally. "Educated, well-connected, charming when he wants to be. The kind of man who can convince you that black is white and wrong is right. He was a colonel in the Confederate Army, commanded a regiment in some of the worst fighting of the war." "Bah, which regiment?" "The 42nd Georgia Infantry. They called themselves the Gray Wolves." Caleb's hand stilled on the kindling, and Anna saw the recognition in his eyes. "You know them?" "I know of them," Caleb said grimly. "They had a reputation for aggressive tactics, even for Confederates. There were stories about what they did to captured Union soldiers to civilians in occupied territory." "The stories were true," Anna said quietly. "Mercer used to tell them to me sometimes when he'd been drinking. He was proud of what he'd done, proud of the fear his name inspired. Said the war taught him that might makes right, that the strong take what they want, and the weak learn to accept it." Caleb struck a match and held it to the kindling, watching the flames catch and spread. "How did he end up running a mining operation in Arizona?" "After the war, a lot of Confederate officers fled west rather than face Reconstruction. Mercer had money hidden away, gold he'd looted from Union supply trains, and he used it to buy land equipment, legitimate mining claims. But the legitimate mining didn't pay well enough to support the lifestyle he wanted. So he started supplementing his workforce." Anna nodded. "At first it was just drifters, men who wouldn't be missed, but then he got bolder. Whole families would disappear from isolated farms. Wagon trains would be attacked by Apache raiders who never took scalps or followed traditional patterns. The survivors, if there were any, would be taken to Eagle Crest. And the authorities never investigated." Anna's laugh was bitter. "Mercer made sure the right people got paid, the right favors got done. He had connections in Washington from his Army days, men who owed him their lives or their careers. And out here in the territories, his word was law. Who was going to contradict a respected businessman and war hero?" Caleb fed more wood to the fire, keeping it small and hot. "You said he kept you in the big house. Why, what made you different from the others?" For a moment, Anna's composure cracked, and Caleb saw the frightened young woman beneath the steel. "Because I reminded him of someone," she said quietly. "His daughter. She died during the war, yellow fever, and I had the same dark hair, the same green eyes. At first I thought it was a blessing. I had decent clothes, decent food, a warm bed. I told myself I was lucky. But it wasn't luck." "No," Anna whispered. "It was a cage made of silk instead of iron, but still a cage. He wanted me to be his daughter to replace what he'd lost. And when I couldn't, when I reminded him too much that I wasn't her. She touched the scar that ran along her jawline, and Caleb understood. Mercer's grief had twisted into something dark and possessive, and Anna had paid the price for looking like a ghost from his past. How long were you there? 3 years. 3 years of watching people disappear into the mines, of keeping his correspondence, of pretending to be grateful for his kindness. I learned to read his moods to stay out of his way when the memories got too strong. And I learned about the ledgers. Anna opened the book in her lap, running her fingers over the carefully written entries. He kept meticulous records of everything every person bought or taken, every ounce of gold extracted, every death in the mines. He was proud of his efficiency, his organization. He used to say that the South lost the war because they didn't understand logistics. And you memorized it all. As much as I could. Names, faces, stories, the woman who cried every night for her children. The old man who taught younger prisoners to read using Bible verses scratched into the mine walls. The boy who tried to escape and was brought back missing 3 fingers as an example to the others. Caleb studied Anna's face in the firelight, seeing the weight of those memories in her eyes. That's why you took the ledger. Not just as evidence, but as a memorial. They deserve to be remembered, Anna said fiercely. They deserve to have their names spoken by someone who knew them as more than just entries in a book. And the ones who are still alive, they deserve to be saved. We'll save them, Caleb said with quiet conviction. Whatever it takes. Anna looked at him across the small fire, this scarred stranger who'd become her unlikely savior. You don't even know them. Why does it matter so much to you? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing, he said finally. I've seen the cost of looking the other way, of telling yourself that someone else will handle it. After Willow Creek, I swore I'd never let that happen again. But you disappeared into these hills. You've been hiding for 3 years. I was, Caleb admitted. I told myself I was healing, that I needed time to find peace. But really I was just running away from the possibility of failing again. Tonight, when I saw those men on my porch, when I realized what they represented, I remembered what it felt like to stand for something. A distant sound made them both freeze, the echo of voices bouncing off canyon walls, still far away but definitely getting closer. Caleb doused the fire quickly, and they sat in darkness, listening to their hunters call to each other in the night. How many men does Mercer have? Caleb asked quietly. At Eagle Crest, maybe 40 or 50. But he's got contacts throughout the territory, men who owe him money or favors. If he puts out the word, he could have 100 riders hunting us within a week. Then we better not give him a week, Caleb said. He moved to where their horse stood tethered, checking the animal's condition. How far is it to Eagle Crest from here? 2 days hard riding north. Why? Because I'm thinking maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back. That ledger is evidence, but it's not going to mean much if we can't get it to someone who can act on it. And even if we do, Mercer will just destroy the records and disappear with his prisoners. Anna felt her heart skip a beat. You're not suggesting we go back there. I'm suggesting we think about it. You said yourself that Mercer's out here with most of his men hunting us. That means Eagle Crest is probably lightly defended right now. If we could get to the prisoners, maybe free some of them. It's suicide, Anna said flatly. Even if there are only a few guards left, the mine is built like a fortress. And if we get caught, we're no worse off than we are now, Caleb pointed out. Mercer's going to keep hunting us until he finds us. Or we find a way to stop him. Maybe it's time to take the fight to him. Anna was quiet for a long moment, considering the impossible audacity of what he was suggesting. Return to the place she'd barely escaped from, walk back into the nightmare she'd fought so hard to leave behind. Everything rational in her mind screamed against it. But then she thought about the people still trapped in those mines, still suffering while she ran free. The woman who cried for her children, the old man with his scratched Bible verses, the boy with 3 missing fingers. How could she ask for her own freedom if she wasn't willing to fight for theirs? There's something else, she said quietly. Something I haven't told you about what's in the ledger. Caleb waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. The records don't just cover Eagle Crest, Anna continued. Mercer has other operations, other mines scattered throughout the territory. and every few months he moves some of the prisoners around, shuffles them between locations to keep them disoriented and prevent them from forming lasting bonds. How many other locations? At least 3, maybe more. And according to the ledger, there's going to be a transfer next week. Mercer's planning to move 40 prisoners from Eagle Crest to a new mine he's opening near the Mexican border. Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. Once they cross that border, they disappear forever, Anna finished. Mexican authorities won't cooperate with any investigation, even if someone believes our story. Those 40 people will die in darkness, and no one will ever know what happened to them. The voices of their pursuers had faded, but Caleb knew it was only temporary. They were out there casting an ever-widening net, and eventually that net would tighten around this hidden canyon. "When is the transfer supposed to happen?" he asked. 5 days from now. They'll be loaded onto wagons and moved south under heavy guard. Once they're gone." Anna's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. 5 days. It wasn't much time to plan a rescue, especially when they were being hunted by every gun in the territory, but it might be the only chance those 40 people would ever have. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "We do this, but we're going to need help." "From who?" "You said yourself that half the territorial authorities are in Mercer's pocket and the other half are too scared to act." "Not the authorities," Caleb said. "But there are others out here, people who understand what it means to fight for survival. The Apache you mentioned, are any of them still in the area?" Anna looked at him in surprise. "You want to ask the Apache for help after everything that's happened between them and the army?" "The Apache understand slavery better than anyone," Caleb said grimly. "They've been fighting it for generations in one form or another, and they have no love for men like Mercer who profit from misery." "Do you really think they'd trust a former cavalry officer?" Caleb touched the scar on his face, remembering how he'd gotten it during his last encounter with Apache warriors. "Maybe not trust," he said, "but they might listen, especially if the alternative is letting Mercer continue his operations unopposed." Anna was quiet for a moment, turning the idea over in her mind. It was dangerous, perhaps, even more dangerous than trying to raid Eagle Crest alone. But it was also their only real chance of success. "I know someone who might help," she said finally. "There's an Apache medicine man named Samuel Greyhawk who sometimes trades with the people at Eagle Crest. He brings herbs and remedies things the prison doctor doesn't have. I think he knows what's really happening there." "Would he talk to us?" "If we can find him. He has a camp somewhere in the Dragoon Mountains, but it moves with the seasons. And even if we do find him, there's no guarantee he'll believe us or want to get involved." "One step at a time," Caleb said. "First, we get out of here without getting shot, then we worry about everything else." They spent the rest of the night in the hidden canyon, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. As dawn approached, the sounds of pursuit had faded, suggesting that their hunters had either given up for the night or moved their search to other areas. When the first pale light began to filter down through the canyon walls, Caleb saddled their horse and prepared to leave their temporary sanctuary. Anna looked refreshed despite the short rest, and there was a new determination in her eyes that hadn't been there the night before. "Ready?" Caleb asked as he helped her mount. "No," Anna said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." They rode out of the canyon just as the sun crested the eastern peaks, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty of it struck Caleb forcefully. He'd forgotten during his years of self-imposed exile how magnificent this country could be when seen through clear eyes. The trail they followed was little more than a game path winding through stands of Ocotillo and Palo Verde toward the distant blue outline of the Dragoon Mountains. It would take them the better part of 2 days to reach the area where Anna thought Samuel Greyhawk might be camped, assuming they could avoid Mercer's search parties along the way. "Tell me about this medicine man," Caleb said as they rode. "How do you know him?" "He came to Eagle Crest every few months, always alone, always at night. He'd trade with whoever was on guard duty, herbs for information mostly. I think he was keeping track of how many Apache were being held in the mines. Mercer was enslaving Apache. Anyone he could get his hands on," Anna said bitterly. "White Mexican Apache, it didn't matter to him, but the Apache were especially valuable because they knew the country so well. Mercer used them as guides and trackers when he needed to move prisoners between locations." Caleb felt his jaw clench with anger. The final defeat of the Apache had been brutal enough without adding the insult of enslavement to the injury of conquest. Greyhawk never tried to free them. How could he outse one old man against 40 guards, but he made sure they got medicine when they were sick, news of their families when he could, and he remembered their names, kept track of who died and who disappeared. I think that mattered to them, knowing that someone would remember. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the magnitude of what they were attempting. The odds against them were overwhelming, but sometimes impossible things happened when people were desperate enough to try them. As the morning wore on, they began to encounter signs of pursuit, dust clouds on distant ridges, the occasional glint of sunlight off metal. Mercer's men were still out there, still searching, but they seemed to be concentrating their efforts to the south and Twenda. Perhaps they assumed the fugitives would head for Mexico or California rather than deeper into Apache country. "They're hurting us," Anna observed, watching a line of riders cross a ridge several miles behind them. "Maybe," Caleb agreed. "Or maybe they're just being thorough. Either way, we need to stay ahead of them." The horse was holding up well, despite the constant travel, but Caleb could see signs of fatigue in the animal's gait. They would need to find water soon, and a place to rest that offered better concealment than the open desert. As if reading his thoughts, Anna pointed toward a cluster of cottonwood trees in the distance. "There's a spring there," she said. "I remember it from when Mercer brought me out here to look at a new mining site." The spring turned out to be exactly what they needed: clear, cold water, bubbling up from an underground source surrounded by enough vegetation to provide cover for both horse and riders. They took turns drinking deeply while the other kept watch, and Caleb refilled their canteens while Anna tended to the horse. "How much further to the Dragoons?" Caleb asked, studying the mountains that seemed no closer despite hours of riding. "Half a day, maybe less, but that's assuming Greyhawk is where I think he is. Apache camps move often, and he might have pulled back deeper into the mountains since the last time I saw him." "Then we better hope we get lucky," Caleb said, "because I don't think we've got time for an extended search." As if to emphasize his point, the distant sound of gunfire echoed across the desert, too far away to be aimed at them, but close enough to be a reminder of how many people were hunting them. They left the spring reluctantly, knowing it might be the last reliable water they'd see for many miles. The terrain was getting rougher as they approached the mountains with more rocks and fewer trails. It would be harder going for their pursuers, but it would be harder for them as well. By late afternoon, they were climbing genuine mountain trails, following paths that switchbacked up steep slopes covered with oak and pine. The air was cooler here, and Caleb could see snow on the highest peaks, despite the desert heat they'd left behind. "There," Anna said suddenly, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from a hidden valley. "That could be him." Caleb studied the smoke, noting how it rose straight up in the still air before dispersing. "Cooking fire," he agreed, "but there's no way to know who's tending it without getting close." "Could be dangerous," Anna said. "Apache don't usually welcome unexpected visitors." "Could be more dangerous to keep running without help," Caleb countered. "Besides, you said this Greyhawk knows you by sight. That's got to count for something." They dismounted and approached the camp on foot, leading their horse and moving as quietly as possible through the pine-scented shadows. The smoke was coming from a natural clearing, perhaps 50 yards across, surrounded by towering trees that would hide it from casual observation. As they got closer, Caleb could make out details of the camp: a small fire in a ring of stones, a brush shelter built against a fallen log, and an old man sitting cross-legged beside the flames. He was clearly Apache, with long gray hair and the weathered features of someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. He appeared to be alone. "Samuel Greyhawk," Anna called softly as they reached the edge of the clearing. The old man looked up without surprise, as if he'd been expecting them. His dark eyes studied Anna's face for a moment before a slight smile crossed his features. "Little sparrow," he said in accented English, "I wondered when you would find your way to my fire." Anna stepped into the clearing with cautious relief, her hand still gripping the precious ledger beneath her torn shawl. Samuel Greyhawk's weathered face bore the same quiet dignity she remembered from his midnight visits to Eagle Crest. But his eyes... Anna stepped into the clearing with cautious relief, her hand still gripping the precious ledger beneath her torn shawl. Samuel Greyhawk's weathered face bore the same quiet dignity she remembered from his midnight visits to Eagle Crest, but his eyes held a new intensity as they shifted between her and the tall stranger at her side. "You remember me?" Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A sparrow does not forget the cage from which it has flown," Greyhawk replied, gesturing for them to sit by his fire. Nor does an old man forget a young woman who showed kindness to his people when no one was watching. Caleb remained standing, his soldier's instincts keeping him alert despite the apparent safety of the camp. "Mr. Greyhawk, my name is Caleb Ward. Anna tells me you might understand what we're trying to do." The medicine man's dark eyes studied Caleb with uncomfortable intensity, as if reading the history written in his scars and the way he carried himself. "You are the one they call Ghostwalker," he said finally. "The cavalry officer who learned to move like Apache to think like Apache." Caleb's hand moved instinctively to the scar on his face. "You know me. Your reputation travels ahead of you even into these mountains. The man who tracked Running Bear for 3 moons after the raid on Willow Creek, the man who could have killed him but chose not to when he learned the truth." Anna looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. What truth? Greyhawk stirred the fire with a long stick, sending sparks spiraling into the twilight air. Running Bear was not at Willow Creek when the attack happened. He was here in these mountains attending the death of his grandfather, but no one would listen to an Apache's word about where he had been. "The army needed someone to blame," Caleb said quietly, "and Running Bear had raided other settlements. It was easier to make him responsible for all of them." "But you found the truth," Greyhawk continued, "and when you had him cornered in Devil's Canyon, when you could have shot him down and claimed the bounty on his head, you let him go." Anna stared at Caleb with new understanding. "That's why you left the army. Not because you failed at Willow Creek, but because you discovered who really did fail." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. The real raiders were already dead by then, killed in a fight with another patrol, but the army wanted a victory to report, and I was the man who was supposed to deliver it. When I let Running Bear escape instead, "They called you a traitor," Greyhawk finished. "Said you had gone native, lost your nerve, but Running Bear told his people what you had done, and word spread among the Apache. There are warriors in these mountains who would trust you because of that choice." "We're going to need that trust," Anna said, unwrapping the ledger with trembling hands, "because what we're planning, it's impossible without help." She opened the book to a page near the middle where Mercer's careful handwriting documented the current population of Eagle Crest. Greyhawk leaned forward to study the entries, his expression growing darker with each name he read. "Joseph Running Elk." He murmured, his finger tracing one of the lines. "I have been looking for him for 2 years. His family thought he was dead." "He's alive," Anna said, "or he was 3 days ago, but there are 40 people scheduled for transfer to the border mines next week. If they leave Eagle Crest, they will never be seen again." Greyhawk nodded grimly. "The mines near the border are death holes. No one survives there longer than a year." Caleb knelt beside the fire, his mind already working through tactical possibilities. How many guards would normally be left at Eagle Crest if Mercer takes most of his men out hunting? "Perhaps 8 or 10, Greyhawk said, "but the camp is built in a box canyon with only one entrance. There are watchtowers and the guards have repeating rifles. Even a small force could hold it against a much larger attacking party." "What about the prisoners themselves?" Caleb asked. "Would they fight if they had the chance?" Anna's face darkened. "Those who still can fight, yes, but Mercer keeps them weak on purpose. Short rations, long hours in the mines, beatings for anyone who shows signs of organizing resistance. Most of them are barely alive." "But some are stronger than others," Greyhawk observed. "The Apache prisoners, for instance. They have learned to hide their strength to appear weaker than they are while they wait for an opportunity." "How many Apache are being held there?" Caleb asked. "According to the ledger, 16. Anna replied, flipping through the pages. "But that doesn't include the ones who might have been brought in since I escaped." Greyhawk was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of difficult decision. "There is a way," he said slowly, "but it would require you to trust Apache warriors you have never met, and it would mean accepting that not everyone can be saved." "What do you mean?" Anna asked. "The transfer you mentioned, 40 prisoners being moved to the border. If we could ambush that convoy instead of attacking the mine directly, we might save those 40 and gather intelligence about Mercer's other operations." Caleb shook his head. "That convoy will be heavily guarded, probably 20 or 30 men. And even if we succeeded, what about the people still trapped at Eagle Crest?" "They would remain slaves," Greyhawk admitted, but 40 souls would be free and the information we gained might help us plan a larger rescue later. Anna felt her heart sink at the thought of abandoning the people she'd left behind. There has to be another way, some way to hit the mine itself. There is, Greyhawk said quietly. But it would mean going into the mine tunnels themselves, fighting in the dark where Mercer's men know every passage and we would be blind. The tunnels, Anna repeated thoughtfully. I know those tunnels. I've been down there with Mercer when he was inspecting new excavations. If we could get inside... It would be suicide, Caleb said flatly. Fighting underground with limited escape routes against defenders who know the terrain. We'd be trapped like rats. Not if we had help from the inside, Anna countered. The prisoners know those tunnels better than anyone. They work in them every day, and if some of them are Apache warriors who've been hiding their strength... Greyhawk's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. You were thinking of a coordinated uprising, prisoners attacking from inside while we assault from outside. The timing would have to be perfect, Caleb said, his tactical mind already working through the possibilities. And we'd need a way to communicate with the prisoners to let them know when to move. I can get inside, Anna said with quiet determination. I know the guard routines, the layout of the camp. If I could reach the Apache prisoners, tell them what we're planning. Absolutely not, Caleb said immediately. If you're caught, Mercer will kill you slowly as an example to the others, and without you, we lose our guide and our intelligence about the mine. Without the prisoners' help, we lose everything anyway, Anna shot back. This is our one chance, Caleb. In 5 days, 40 people disappear forever, and who knows how many more will follow them. I won't let that happen. Greyhawk held up a weathered hand for silence. There may be a middle path, he said. I have contacts among the Apache prisoners, ways of getting messages to them that do not require direct contact, but it would take time to arrange, and time is what we lack. How much time? Caleb asked. 2 days, perhaps 3, long enough to gather warriors willing to help to plan the attack in detail to get word to the prisoners about when to be ready. Anna calculated rapidly in her head. That would give us only 2 days before the transfer, and if something goes wrong, if we're discovered, then we fall back to the original plan, Caleb said. Hit the convoy instead of the mine. It's not perfect, but it's better than letting all of them disappear into those border death traps. The 3 of them sat in contemplative silence as full darkness settled over the mountain camp. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out in the pines, and the fire crackled softly as it consumed the dry wood. The weight of what they were planning seemed to press down on the clearing like a physical presence. There is something else you should know, Greyhawk said eventually, about Colonel Mercer and why he chose this particular location for his operation. Anna looked up sharply. What do you mean? Eagle Crest was not always a mining camp. During the Apache Wars, it was the site of a massacre. Army troops cornered a band of peaceful Apache, their families who had been trying to reach the reservation. When the Apache tried to surrender, the soldiers opened fire anyway. Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. How many? 73, Greyhawk said quietly. Men, women, children. Their bones still rest in that canyon beneath the buildings Mercer constructed for his mine. He built his slave camp on top of a massacre site. Anna breathed, horrified understanding dawning in her eyes. Mercer commanded the troops that day, Greyhawk continued. It was one of his first independent actions after the war ended when he was serving in the Frontier Army. He chose that location for his mine deliberately as a monument to his own power. The revelation hit Anna like a physical blow. She had known Mercer was capable of great cruelty, but the calculated symbolism of building his slave operation on top of Apache graves spoke to a level of evil that made her stomach turn. All those people, she whispered, working above the bones of massacre victims, never knowing. The Apache prisoners know, Greyhawk said grimly. They can feel the presence of their ancestors in that place. It is why they have endured so long without breaking. They know they fight not just for themselves, but for the dead who cannot rest while that place remains defiled. Caleb stared into the fire, his mind reeling with the implications. That's why you're willing to help us, isn't it? This isn't just about freeing current prisoners. It's about ending the desecration of a sacred burial ground. The dead cry out for justice. Greyhawk nodded. And the living must answer that call regardless of the cost. Anna closed the ledger with shaking hands. Then we do it, We hit the mine directly, free as many people as we can, and put an end to Mercer's operation forever. The warriors I can gather will not be enough for a frontal assault, Greyhawk warned. We will need to be clever to use surprise and the prisoners' knowledge of the tunnels to our advantage. How many men can you bring? Caleb asked. Perhaps a dozen, no more. The Apache bands are scattered and many warriors are reluctant to risk open warfare so soon after the last defeat. A dozen men against a fortified position, Caleb mused. It's been done before, but the timing has to be perfect. Anna looked between the two men, seeing the doubt in their faces despite their words of commitment. You think it's hopeless, don't you? I think it's the kind of hopeless that sometimes works, Caleb said slowly, because nobody expects someone to be crazy enough to try it. The Apache have a saying, Greyhawk added. Sometimes the only way through the mountain is to become the avalanche. They spent the rest of the evening planning in detail, using Anna's knowledge of the mine layout and Greyhawk's understanding of Apache fighting tactics to develop a strategy that might actually work. It would require split-second timing, perfect coordination between inside and outside forces, and a fair amount of luck. But it was possible, barely. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. Greyhawk would use his network of contacts to get word to the Apache prisoners about the coming assault, telling them to be ready to strike at the guards from within the tunnels. When they heard the signal, 3 rifle shots fired in rapid succession. Meanwhile, Caleb and Anna would infiltrate the camp from the rear, using the cover of darkness and Anna's knowledge of the guard rotations to get close to the main compound. At precisely midnight on the third night, when the guards would be at their most complacent, the attack would begin. The Apache prisoners would overwhelm their immediate captors in the tunnels, while Caleb and Anna created chaos above ground, drawing the remaining guards away from the mine entrances. Greyhawk and his warriors would then storm the main gate, trapping the defenders between 2 forces. What about the other prisoners? Anna asked. The ones who aren't Apache, who won't know what's happening. We'll have to trust that they'll have the sense to run when the shooting starts, Caleb said grimly. There's no way to coordinate with all of them without risking discovery. Some will die, Greyhawk said with brutal honesty, in the confusion and the crossfire from guards who would rather kill prisoners than let them escape. This is the price of freedom. It is paid in blood, and not all of it belongs to the enemy. Anna nodded, understanding the harsh mathematics of their situation. They were not trying to orchestrate a perfect rescue, but a catastrophic disruption that would shatter Mercer's operation and give as many people as possible a chance to run. Those who were strong enough and lucky enough would survive. The others. She pushed the thought away. They would save who they could save and mourn the rest later. As the fire died down to glowing embers, Greyhawk produced a set of blankets and indicated that his guests should rest. Tomorrow we begin gathering warriors, he said. The day after we strike. Use this night to prepare your spirits, for what comes next will test us all. Anna lay wrapped in her blanket, staring up at the stars visible through the pine branches overhead. Beside her, she could hear Caleb's steady breathing as he slept the light sleep of a soldier who might need to wake and fight at any moment. Beyond the circle of dying firelight, she could sense Greyhawk keeping watch, a silent guardian between them and whatever dangers the night might hold. Tomorrow would begin the final phase of her long journey from slave to free woman. In 3 days, she would either be dead or she would have helped free nearly 200 people from a living hell. The ledger pressed against her chest under the blanket seemed to pulse with the weight of all those names, all those lives hanging in the balance. She thought about the little girl who had died because she cried too much, about the woman who wept for her children, about Joseph running elk whose family thought he was dead. She thought about the Apache bones beneath Mercer's buildings crying out for justice across the decades. And she thought about Caleb, the man who had saved her twice now, once as a child, once as a woman, and who was risking everything to help her save others. Whatever happened in the next few days, she would not let his sacrifice be in vain. The last thing she saw before sleep finally claimed her was a shooting star streaking across the desert sky, bright and brief and beautiful. She chose to take it as a good omen, though she knew that omens, like plans, were fragile things that could shatter when they met the hard reality of bullets and blood. But sometimes, she told herself, as consciousness faded, fragile things turned out to be stronger than anyone expected. Sometimes the sparrow really could break free from its cage, no matter how strong the bars or how cruel the keeper. The dawn would tell them which kind of fragile thing they really were. The dawn broke gray and cold over the Dragoon Mountains, and with it came the sound of horses moving through the pine-scented air. Anna woke to find Greyhawk already gone from the camp, leaving only the faint impression of his bedroll and a small pile of jerky wrapped in cloth. Caleb was sitting by the rekindled fire cleaning his rifle with the methodical precision of a man who knew his life might depend on its reliability. "Where is he?" Anna asked, sitting up and pulling her blanket closer against the mountain chill. "Gathering his warriors," Caleb replied without looking up from his weapon. "Said he'd be back by evening with however many men he could convince to join this madness." Anna studied his profile in the morning light, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands moved with mechanical efficiency over the rifle's action. "You're having second thoughts." "I'm having realistic thoughts," Caleb corrected, "about what happens when a dozen Apache with bows and old muskets go up against repeating rifles in fortified positions. About how many people are going to die for this plan of ours." "People are already dying," Anna said quietly. "Every day in those mines. At least this way, some of them have a chance." Caleb set down his rifle and looked at her directly for the first time that morning. "I need you to understand something, Anna. What we're planning to do tomorrow night, it's not a rescue mission, it's a war. And in war, good people die alongside the bad ones. Are you prepared for that?" Anna thought about the question for a long moment, remembering faces from Eagle Crest voices crying out in the darkness of the mine tunnels. "I've been watching good people die for 3 years," she said finally. "At least this way they'll die fighting back." They spent the morning in careful preparation, checking weapons, studying the rough map Anna had sketched of Eagle Crest's layout, discussing contingencies for when their plan inevitably went wrong. By midday, they had worn grooves in the dirt from pacing, and their voices were hoarse from talking through the same tactical problems again and again. It was near sunset when Greyhawk returned, and he didn't come alone. The warriors who followed him through the trees moved like shadows given substance, their faces painted with the geometric patterns of war. Anna counted 11 men, each armed with a mixture of traditional and modern weapons bows, alongside cavalry carbines, war clubs paired with military-issue revolvers. The leader of the war party was a man perhaps 40 years old, with scars marking his arms and a bearing that spoke of battles fought and survived. His dark eyes studied Caleb with open skepticism as Greyhawk made introductions. "This is Red Horse," Greyhawk said. "He commands these warriors and he has agreed to hear our plan." Red Horse stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Caleb's face. "I know you, Ghost Walker," he said in careful English. "My brother was Running Bear. You could have killed him, but you chose mercy instead. For this, I am willing to listen." "Your brother was a good man, caught in a bad situation," Caleb replied. "Just like all of us." "Good men do not build slave camps on the bones of our ancestors," Red Horse said, his voice hardening. "Good men do not chain our children and work them to death in darkness." "No," Caleb agreed. "They don't. That's why we're here." The war council that followed was unlike anything Anna had ever witnessed. The Apache warriors sat in a circle around the fire, passing a ceremonial pipe, while Greyhawk translated between languages and cultures, bridging the gap between their desperate plan and the ancient traditions that governed Apache warfare. Red Horse listened intently as Anna described the layout of Eagle Crest, the guard rotations, the location of the prisoner barracks. His questions were sharp and tactical, focused on timing fields of fire escape routes. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "The spirits of the dead cry out from that place," he said finally. "They demand justice, but they also demand wisdom. To die uselessly serves no one, neither the living nor the dead." "What are you saying?" Anna asked. "I'm saying that if we do this thing, we do it the Apache way. We strike fast, we strike hard, and we leave nothing behind but ashes and empty chains." Caleb felt a chill at the implication. "You're talking about burning the entire camp." "I'm talking about ending it," Red Horse said firmly. "Mercer will rebuild if we leave his infrastructure intact. He will import new guards, new prisoners, and the suffering will continue. But if Eagle Crest burns to the ground, if his operation is so thoroughly destroyed that rebuilding would cost more than starting fresh elsewhere, then perhaps he will choose easier prey." Anna thought about the buildings she had lived and worked in for 3 years, the office where Mercer kept his records, the quarters where the guards slept. There are other ledgers there, she said slowly. Records of his other operations correspondence with his contacts in Washington. If we could get to those before burning the place. Now you're thinking like a warrior, Red Horse approved. Strike the enemy where he is weakest, but also where it hurts him most. They refined the plan through the night, with Red Horse's warriors contributing insights from decades of guerrilla warfare against superior forces. The attack would begin not at midnight as originally planned, but in the hour before dawn, when the guards would be at their most exhausted and the prisoners would have had time to prepare. The Apache would approach from the south using a dry wash that ran almost to the camp's perimeter. Meanwhile, Caleb and Anna would circle around to the north where the mine entrance was most lightly guarded. When the shooting started, Anna would slip into Mercer's office to retrieve whatever documents she could carry while Caleb held the position. "And if you're trapped in there," Caleb asked, "then you burn it anyway," Anna said with quiet determination. "The mission matters more than any one person." Red Horse nodded approvingly at her words. "This one understands the price of freedom," he said to Greyhawk. "She will do well in battle." As the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the pine branches, the war party made their final preparations. Weapons were loaded and checked faces painted with traditional war designs, prayers offered to the spirits of ancestors and the fierce gods of battle. Anna found herself standing apart from the others, staring down at the ledger that had started this entire desperate venture. In a few hours, they would either succeed in their impossible mission or die in the attempt. Either way, her long flight from Eagle Crest would finally come to an end. "Scared?" Caleb asked, joining her at the edge of the clearing. "Terrified," Anna admitted. "But also relieved, I think. Whatever happens today, at least I won't have to run anymore." "We could still call it off," Caleb said quietly. "Find another way. Make contact with the territorial authorities. Let someone else handle the fighting." Anna shook her head. "You know as well as I do that wouldn't work. Too many people in high places owe Mercer favors or fear his influence. By the time we convinced anyone to act, he would have moved his entire operation across the border." "Then we finish what we started," Caleb said. "Together." The ride to Eagle Crest took most of the day, with the war party splitting up to approach from different directions. Anna and Caleb traveled alone, keeping to the high country where they could watch for Mercer's patrols. The landscape grew increasingly desolate as they neared their destination, scrub brush and red rock replacing the pine forests of the mountains. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they reached the ridge overlooking Eagle Crest Canyon. Anna felt her breath catch as she looked down at the place that had been her prison for 3 years. The mine buildings crouched in the narrow canyon like a wound in the earth, smoke rising from cooking fires and the constant haze of schist from the excavations. "Jesus," Caleb breathed, studying the layout through his field glasses. "It looks like a military installation." He was right. Watchtowers commanded the approach routes, guard posts controlled access to the mine tunnels, and the prisoner barracks were surrounded by a double fence of sharpened stakes. Even the main house where Mercer conducted his business was built like a fortress with thick walls and narrow windows. "How many guards can you see?" Anna asked. Caleb swept the glasses across the compound methodically. 8 in the towers, maybe 6 more on patrol, plus however many are inside the buildings. "Mercer's not back yet," Anna observed, noting the absence of activity around the main house. "He's still out there hunting for us." "Good. That improves our odds considerably." They settled in to wait as the sun completed its journey across the sky. Below them, the routine of the slave camp continued with mechanical precision. Prisoners emerged from the mine tunnels in shuffling lines, their faces gray with exhaustion and rock dust. Guards counted them like livestock, checking numbers against written lists. The evening meal was distributed, thin gruel ladled from enormous pots that barely seemed to contain enough food for so many people. Anna watched it all with a mixture of fury and heartbreak, remembering her own years of enduring that same routine. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a group of prisoners near the mine entrance. "Do you see the tall man with the braided hair? That's Joseph Running Elk." Caleb adjusted his glasses and found the man Anna indicated. Even from a distance, even bowed down by exhaustion and malnutrition, there was something in the Apache prisoner's bearing that spoke of unbroken spirit. "He'll be ready when the fighting starts," Anna said with certainty. "They all will. They've been waiting for this chance for years." As full darkness settled over the canyon, they began their descent toward the mine compound. The Apache war party would already be in position in the southern wash, waiting for the signal to attack. Everything now depended on timing and luck, two commodities that had been in short supply throughout their entire desperate venture. The northern approach to Eagle Crest led through a maze of boulders and dry gullies that provided excellent concealment, but treacherous footing in the darkness. Anna led the way, her memory of the terrain guiding them around the worst obstacles and away from the established guard posts. They were within 100 yards of the mine entrance when the first complication arose. A guard patrol that should have passed 20 minutes earlier came stumbling through the rocks. 3 men with rifles and lanterns who were clearly more interested in their whiskey bottle than their assigned duties. Caleb and Anna pressed themselves against a boulder, hardly daring to breathe as the guards passed within arm's reach of their hiding place. One of the men paused, peering into the shadows where they crouched, and Anna felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited to be discovered. "Thought I heard something," the guard muttered to his companions. "You're hearing things again, Murphy," one of the others replied. "Just like last week when you swore you saw Apache in every shadow." "There's nothing out here but rocks and scorpions," the third man added. "Come on, let's finish the patrol and get back to the warmth." They moved on, and Anna let out a shaky breath of relief. But the close call reminded her of how precarious their situation really was. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and their entire plan would collapse into chaos and bloodshed. The mine entrance loomed ahead of them like a mouth opened in the earth, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the rock walls. 2 guards stood at the opening, but they were facing inward, watching the tunnel rather than the approaches. Anna could hear voices echoing from within, prisoners and overseers discussing the next day's work assignments. "There," Anna whispered, pointing to a cluster of buildings near the main house. "Mercer's office is in that stone building with the tile roof. The records will be in a safe behind his desk. Can you open it?" "I know the combination. He made me memorize it in case he ever needed documents when he wasn't there." Caleb studied the building, noting the guards who walked regular patrols around its perimeter. Getting in won't be the problem. Getting out with the papers will be. They worked their way closer using storage sheds and equipment yards for concealment. The main compound was larger than it had appeared from the ridge, with dozens of buildings serving various functions. Anna identified them in whispered commentary: the guard barracks, the kitchen, the punishment cells where recalcitrant prisoners were held in solitary confinement. "How long until the attack begins?" Caleb asked, checking his pocket watch in the dim light. 20 minutes, Anna replied. "Maybe less." They reached the cover of a tool shed within 50 feet of Mercer's office. From here, Anna could see the window of the room where she had spent countless hours taking dictation, keeping records, pretending to be grateful for the colonel's twisted version of kindness. "When the shooting starts, I go through that window," she said, pointing to the opening she knew was never secured. "The safe is against the far wall behind a painting of Robert E. Lee. I'll need maybe 10 minutes to clean it out." "You'll have as long as I can give you," Caleb promised. "But if the situation goes bad, you run. Don't try to be a hero." Anna almost smiled at the irony of those words. "I think we're both well past the point of heroism, don't you?" The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every sound seemed magnified in the desert stillness: the crunch of gravel under a guard's boots, the distant murmur of prisoners in their barracks, the soft whisper of wind through the canyon walls. Anna found herself holding her breath, listening for the 3 rifle shots that would signal the beginning of the end. When they came, the sounds were sharp and clear in the thin air, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. For a moment, everything in the camp seemed frozen, as if no one could quite believe what they were hearing. Then chaos erupted. Shouts rang out from the southern perimeter as Red Horse's warriors poured out of the wash, their war cries piercing the night like knives. Rifle fire crackled from the watchtowers as the guards tried to respond to the sudden assault. From somewhere deep in the mine tunnels came the sound of fighting as the Apache prisoners turned on their captors. "Go!" Caleb shouted, and Anna sprinted across the open ground toward Mercer's office. She reached the window just as the building's guard came running around the corner, drawn by the sounds of battle. Caleb's rifle spoke once, and the man dropped without a sound. Anna hauled herself through the window and dropped into the familiar room where she had spent so many nightmare hours. The office looked exactly as she remembered it. Heavy wooden furniture, military memorabilia on the walls, the painting of Lee in his dress uniform hanging behind the massive desk. Anna ran to it, pulling the frame away from the wall to reveal the safe beyond. Her fingers found this combination lock and began turning the dial with practiced precision. 23 left, 17 right, 41 left. The tumblers clicked into place and the heavy door swung open to reveal shelves packed with documents. Anna began grabbing papers by the handful, stuffing them into a canvas bag she had brought for the purpose. Ledgers, correspondence maps marking the locations of other mines, lists of contacts in territorial and federal government. Everything that could destroy Mercer's network if it fell into the right hands. Outside, the battle was intensifying. She could hear the distinctive crack of Apache rifles mixing with the heavier reports of the guards repeating weapons. Somewhere in the distance, a building had caught fire, and the orange glow was beginning to flicker through the office windows. Anna was reaching for the last shelf of documents when the office door burst open. She spun around to find herself facing a guard she recognized, Sergeant Donovan, the brutal enforcer who had personally overseen many of the beatings she had witnessed. Well, Donovan said, raising his rifle. Look what the cat dragged in. The colonel's going to be real pleased when I bring him your head. Anna's hand moved instinctively toward the pistol Caleb had given her, but she knew she would never clear leather before Donovan's finger tightened on his trigger. Time seemed to slow as she watched his knuckle whiten with pressure. The window behind her exploded inward as Caleb came through it in a shower of glass and wood splinters. His momentum carried him into Donovan before the guard could fire, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Anna watched in horror as the two men struggled for control of Donovan's rifle. The sergeant was younger and heavier, but Caleb had the advantage of surprise and desperation. They rolled across the floor, knocking over furniture and scattering papers from the open safe. The rifle discharged once the bullet shattering a window, and Anna saw her chance. She drew her pistol and thumbed back the hammer, trying to get a clear shot at Donovan without hitting Caleb. But the men were moving too fast, locked together in a struggle that would end with one of them dead. Donovan managed to get his hands around Caleb's throat, pressing his thumbs against the windpipe with murderous intent. Caleb's face began to turn purple as his air supply was cut off, and Anna knew she had to act. She stepped forward and pressed the barrel of her pistol against the base of Donovan's skull. "Let him go," she said quietly. Donovan froze, feeling the cold metal against his skin. For a moment the room was silent, except for the sounds of battle raging outside. "You won't do it," Donovan said finally. "You're not a killer." "You're right," Anna said. "I'm not. But I'm not a slave anymore either." She pulled the trigger. Caleb rolled Donovan's body aside and struggled to his feet, massaging his bruised throat. "Are you all right?" he asked hoarsely. Anna stared down at the dead guard, feeling strangely numb. She had taken a life, something she had never imagined herself capable of, but she felt no remorse, only a cold satisfaction that one of Mercer's enforcers would never hurt another prisoner. "I'm fine," she said, turning back to the safe. "Help me finish this." They swept the remaining documents into the bag, not bothering to sort through them in their haste. Outside, the sounds of battle were shifting as the Apache fighters pressed deeper into the compound. Anna could hear prisoners shouting as they poured out of the barracks, some running for the canyon mouth while others joined the fight against their former captors. "Time to go," Caleb said, slinging the document bag over his shoulder. "This place is going to be an inferno in another few minutes." They climbed back through the broken window to find the compound transformed into a scene from hell. Buildings burned throughout the camp, sending towers of flame and smoke into the night sky. Guards and prisoners fought desperate battles in the orange-lit darkness, while Apache warriors moved like ghosts through the chaos, striking where they were least expected. Anna saw Joseph running elk near the mine entrance, leading a group of freed prisoners in an assault on the guard post there. The tall Apache moved with the fluid grace of a natural warrior, despite his years of captivity, and Anna felt a surge of fierce pride at seeing him free and fighting. "The main house!" Caleb shouted over the din of battle. "We need to burn the main house before we leave." They fought their way across the compound, using the smoke and confusion for cover. Anna carried a torch taken from one of the burning buildings while Caleb cleared their path with his rifle. Twice they had to dive for cover as stray bullets whined past their heads, and once Anna found herself face to face with a guard who recognized her. "Traitor!" the man screamed, raising his pistol, but Caleb was faster, his rifle barking once before the guard could fire. The main house stood apart from the other buildings. its thick walls and defensive positions making it a natural stronghold. But most of the guards who might have defended it were dead or fighting elsewhere, and Anna was able to lead Caleb through a servant's entrance she knew would be unguarded. The interior of the house was exactly as Anna remembered it, expensive furniture looted from Raids paintings and decorations that spoke of a man trying to recreate the antebellum South in the Arizona desert. It was here that Mercer had entertained visitors here, that he had planned his expansions into other territories. "Spread out," Caleb said, handing Anna another torch. "Make sure it burns completely." They moved through the house, methodically setting fires in every room. Anna took particular satisfaction in torching Mercer's bedroom, the place where she had endured so many uncomfortable conversations about his dead daughter and the role he expected her to play. The library was last, and Anna paused in the doorway to look at the shelves of books that Mercer had used to educate himself about his enemies. Military treatises, ethnographic studies of Native American tribes, economic analyses of the mining industry, all the knowledge he had used to build his empire of misery. She touched her torch to the nearest shelf and watched the flames begin to spread. When they emerged from the burning house, the battle for Eagle Crest was essentially over. The surviving guards had either fled into the desert or surrendered to the Apache warriors. Prisoners streamed past them, heading for the canyon mouth in freedom, many of them carrying weapons taken from their former captors. Red Horse appeared out of the smoke, his war paint streaked with sweat and blood, but his eyes bright with victory. "It is done," he said simply. "The slave camp burns and the people are free." "How many did we lose?" Caleb asked. 3 warriors and perhaps a dozen prisoners," Red Horse replied. "But more than 100 walk free tonight, and that is worth any price." Anna looked around at the burning compound, at the destruction they had wrought in a single night of violence. It seemed impossible that something that had loomed so large in her nightmares could be reduced to ash and smoke so quickly. "We need to go," Caleb said, checking his watch. "Dawn's coming and Mercer's patrols will see the smoke from miles away." They gathered their few possessions and joined the stream of refugees heading for the canyon mouth. Behind them, Eagle Crest burned like a funeral pyre, sending a pillar of smoke and flame into the star-filled Skeene. Anna took one last look over her shoulder at the place that had been her prison and felt a weight lift from her soul that she had carried for 3 long years. At the canyon mouth, the freed prisoners were scattering in all directions, some heading for Mexico, others toward the territorial settlements, many simply disappearing into the vast emptiness of the desert. Joseph Running Elk approached them as they prepared to leave, his scarred face solemn in the firelight. "I know you," he said to Anna. "You were kind to my people when kindness was dangerous. For that you will always have a place by Apache fires." "Where will you go?" Anna asked. "Home," Joseph said simply. "To find my family, to tell them I still live. And you—" Anna looked at Caleb, then at the bag of documents that could destroy what remained of Mercer's network. "To finish what we started," she said, "to make sure this never happens again." Red Horse and his warriors melted back into the desert as quickly as they had appeared, taking with them the freed Apache prisoners who chose to return to their traditional life. The others, whites, Mexicans, mixed-blood refugees from a dozen different backgrounds, went their separate ways into the night. Soon only Anna and Caleb remained at the canyon mouth, watching Eagle Crest burn in the distance. The flames were beginning to die down now, but the smoke would be visible for days, a testament to what happened when desperate people found the courage to fight back. "Where to now?" Caleb asked as they mounted their horse. Anna clutched the document bag tighter, thinking of all the evidence it contained, all the names and places that could bring down Mercer's entire operation. "Tucson," she said, "to find that honest sheriff you mentioned. And then... Anna smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a smile without fear or reservation. "Then we see how far this fire can spread." They rode through the night as Eagle Crest burned behind them, the glow visible for miles across the desert landscape. Anna clutched the precious document bag against her chest, feeling the weight of evidence that could topple an empire built on human misery. Beside her, Caleb guided their horse through the darkness with the sure instincts of a man who had spent years learning to navigate by starlight and intuition. The journey to Tucson would take them 3 days across some of the most unforgiving terrain in the territory, but they had no choice. Every hour that passed gave Mercer more time to discover the destruction of his operation, to begin covering his tracks and eliminating evidence. Speed was their only ally now. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, they paused at a water hole to rest their exhausted horse and plan their route. Anna spread out one of the maps they had recovered from Mercer's safe, tracing the network of mines and camps that stretched across 3 territories. "Look at this," she said, her finger following a series of marked locations. "He's got operations in New Mexico, Colorado, even up into Utah. We thought Eagle Crest was the heart of it, but it was just one tentacle of something much larger." Caleb studied the map grimly. "Which means burning one camp isn't going to stop him. He'll just shift operations to another location and keep going." "Not if we can get this evidence to the right people," Anna said, pulling out a stack of correspondence from the document bag. "Look at these letters. Senators, territorial governors, army officers. Half the political establishment in Washington has been taking money from Mercer's operation." She handed him a letter written on official congressional letterhead, and Caleb read it with growing disbelief. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "He's got a senator from Ohio lobbying for reduced oversight of territorial mining operations. And here's one from a territorial judge promising to dismiss any charges brought against Mercer's associates," Anna added, producing another document. "He's not just running a slave operation, he's running a corruption network that reaches all the way to the Capitol." The magnitude of what they were up against began to sink in as they sorted through more papers. Bills of sale for human beings written on official territorial letterhead, military supply contracts that were actually orders for captured prisoners, land grants obtained through bribery and intimidation. "We can't just take this to the local sheriff," Caleb realized. "If Mercer's got this many people in his pocket, how do we know who to trust?" Anna was quiet for a moment, studying a letter that bore the seal of the Territorial Attorney General's office. "There might be a way," she said slowly. "Do you remember the newspaper stories about the investigation into territorial corruption? The reporter who's been writing about missing federal funds?" "Sarah McKenna from the Tucson Herald." Caleb nodded. "What about her?" "According to this letter, Mercer tried to bribe her editor to kill her stories. When that didn't work, he tried to have her arrested on trumped-up charges, but she kept digging anyway." Anna pulled out another document, this one marked with urgent notations in Mercer's own handwriting. "He was planning to have her killed. There's a contract here with someone called the Surgeon, $5,000 to eliminate the McKenna problem permanently." Caleb felt a chill as he read the assassination contract. If she's that much of a threat to his operation, then she might be the one person in the territory we can trust completely, Anna finished. Someone he's tried to buy, frame, and kill isn't likely to be working for him. They mounted up again and pressed on toward Tucson now with a clearer sense of purpose. The sun climbed steadily as they rode, turning the desert air into a shimmering furnace that made every breath an effort. But they kept going, driven by the knowledge that time was running out, not just for them, but for the hundreds of people still trapped in Mercer's remaining camps. By late afternoon, they could see dust clouds on the horizon behind them. Mercer's search parties, no doubt following the smoke from Eagle Crest and trying to pick up their trail. The pursuit was still miles away, but it was gaining ground steadily. "They're not going to give up," Anna observed, shading her eyes against the sun as she studied the distant riders. "Would you if you were in Mercer's position?" Caleb replied. "We've got enough evidence to hang him and half his associates. He can't afford to let us reach civilization alive." They pushed their horse harder, knowing they were asking more of the animal than it could safely give. The pursuing dust clouds grew larger throughout the afternoon, and by sunset they could make out individual riders through Caleb's field glasses. 20 men, maybe more, he reported. "And they're riding fresh horses. They'll catch us before we reach Tucson at this rate." Anna studied the terrain ahead, looking for anything that might give them an advantage. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by scattered mesas and dry washes that offered little concealment. "There," she said suddenly, pointing toward a line of cottonwood trees in the distance. "That's the Santa Cruz River. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the breaks along the riverbank." They turned their tired horse toward the distant trees, hoping the promise of water would give the animal a second wind. Behind them, the pursuit had spread out into a skirmish line, trying to cut off any possibility of escape. The race to the river became a nightmare of heat and exhaustion. Their horse stumbled repeatedly, foam flecking its muzzle as it struggled to maintain pace. Anna could hear the pursuing riders getting closer, their shouts carrying across the desert air as they closed the distance. They reached the riverbank just as the sun was setting, their horse finally collapsing from exhaustion at the water's edge. Anna and Caleb stumbled from the saddle, knowing they would have to continue on foot from here. "This way," Anna said, plunging into the thick vegetation along the riverbank. The cottonwoods and willows provided blessed concealment, and the soft ground muffled their footsteps as they worked their way downstream. Behind them, they could hear Mercer's men reaching the river, spreading out along both banks to search for their quarry. Torches began to flicker through the trees as darkness fell, and Anna realized they were being hunted by men who had no intention of taking prisoners. "Over here," Caleb whispered, pulling her toward an undercut bank where the river had carved a small cave during flood season. They crawled into the narrow space just as torches began moving past their hiding place. "Find them!" a voice shouted from somewhere nearby. Anna recognized it with a chill. Colonel Mercer himself had joined the hunt. "They can't have gone far on foot. Search every tree, every gully. I want them alive if possible, but I want them found." They huddled in their hiding place as the search continued around them. Anna could hear men splashing through the shallow water, cursing as they stumbled over submerged rocks and branches. The document bag pressed against her side, its contents representing the only hope for justice for hundreds of enslaved people. "Sir?" Another voice called out from upstream. "We found their horse. Looks like it died from exhaustion." "Then they're on foot," Mercer replied, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "Set up a perimeter. They can't get far without mounts, and I want them contained until daylight." Anna felt her heart sink as the implications became clear. They were trapped, surrounded by armed men in hostile territory with no way to call for help. Even if they managed to evade capture until dawn, they would still be miles from Tucson with no transportation. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. "We wait until they settle in for the night," he whispered. "Then we try to slip through their lines. And if we can't, then we make sure the evidence gets out even if we don't." Hours passed. As they waited in their cramped hiding place, listening to the sounds of Mercer's men establishing their perimeter. Anna dozed fitfully, exhaustion finally overcoming fear as her body demanded rest. When she woke, it was past midnight, and the search activity had quieted to occasional patrols along the riverbank. "Now," Caleb breathed, and they began crawling out of their hiding place. The night was overcast with no moon visible through the thick clouds. They moved like ghosts through the riverside vegetation, pausing frequently to listen for guards. Anna's heart hammered every time a twig snapped underfoot or a bird called out in alarm at their passage. They had made it perhaps half a mile downstream when disaster struck. Anna stepped on what she thought was solid ground only to have it give way beneath her weight. She tumbled down a steep bank with a crash that seemed to echo like thunder in the still night. "What was that?" a voice called out from somewhere nearby. "Probably just an animal," another replied, but Anna could hear footsteps moving in their direction. Caleb helped her to her feet, checking quickly for injuries. She had twisted her ankle in the fall, but nothing seemed broken. However, the noise had definitely attracted attention, and they could see torches beginning to converge on their position. "Run!" Caleb whispered urgently. They stumbled through the darkness, Anna limping heavily on her injured ankle while Caleb supported her weight. Behind them, shouts erupted as their pursuers found the disturbed ground where she had fallen. "There! In the trees!" Someone yelled, and suddenly the night exploded with gunfire. Bullets whined through the branches around them as they crashed through the undergrowth. Anna could hear men running to cut off their escape, spreading out through the forest in a coordinated manhunt. They broke out of the trees onto open ground, and Anna's heart sank as she saw more torches ahead of them. Mercer had anticipated their route and positioned men to intercept them. They were surrounded. "This way," Caleb said desperately, pulling her toward a low ridge that might offer some concealment. They scrambled up the rocky slope, loose stones cascading behind them with every step. Anna's ankle screamed with pain, but she forced herself to keep moving. The document bag bounced against her side, its precious contents representing the hopes of so many people who were counting on them to succeed. At the top of the ridge, they found themselves looking down into a narrow valley where more torches moved in organized patterns. Mercer had deployed his entire force in a methodical search that was closing in from all directions. "We're trapped," Anna said, stating the obvious. Caleb studied their surroundings, desperately looking for any avenue of escape. But the tactical situation was hopeless. They were on foot, injured and surrounded by mounted men with superior numbers and firepower. "The evidence," he said finally. "We need to get it to someone who can use it." Anna looked at him with sudden understanding. "You're not suggesting... I'm suggesting that one of us might be able to slip through their lines if the other provides a distraction." "Absolutely not," Anna said fiercely. "We finish this together or not at all." Before Caleb could argue, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. A line of riders was moving up the slope toward their position torches held high to light the way. At their head rode Colonel Mercer himself, his face grim with determination in the flickering light. "Miss Hayes," Mercer called out as his men surrounded them, "and the famous Ghost Walker, you've led us quite a chase." Anna clutched the document bag tighter, her mind racing for options that didn't seem to exist. They were outnumbered 20-1 with nowhere to run and no hope of rescue. "You're finished, Mercer," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everyone knows what you've been doing. Burning Eagle Crest won't stop the investigation." Mercer dismounted and walked slowly toward them, his hand resting casually on his pistol butt. "I think you overestimate the reach of your little rebellion," he said with cold amusement. "Eagle Crest was a minor operation easily replaced, and the territorial authorities will accept my explanation that it was destroyed by Apache raiders." "What about the evidence?" Anna challenged. "The documents that prove your connections to Washington. What documents?" Mercer smiled. "I see no documents here, only 2 fugitives who died resisting arrest." The implication was clear, and Anna felt despair settling over her like a shroud. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, only to fail at the final moment. That was when the first shot rang out from the darkness beyond the torches. One of Mercer's men cried out and toppled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. The horses reared and whinnied in alarm as more shots followed, coming from multiple directions around the perimeter. "What the hell?" Mercer spun around, trying to locate the source of the attack. His answer came in the form of war cries that echoed off the valley walls. Apache voices raised in the ancient song of battle. Red Horse and his warriors had followed them, tracking the pursuit through the night and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Chaos erupted as Mercer's men found themselves under attack from an enemy they couldn't see. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like fireflies as the Apache warriors moved through the night with ghostly efficiency, striking and vanishing before their targets could respond. In the confusion, Caleb grabbed Anna's hand and pulled her toward the edge of the ridge. "Now," he shouted over the gunfire. They half ran, half fell down the steep slope, using the distraction to break free from their captors. Behind them, the battle raged as Mercer tried to rally his scattered forces against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Anna's ankle gave out completely as they reached the bottom of the ridge, and she collapsed in a heap of torn fabric and blood. The document bag spilled open, scattering papers across the rocky ground. "Leave me," she gasped as Caleb knelt beside her. "Take the evidence and go." "Not a chance," Caleb said grimly, gathering up the scattered documents. "We started this together. We finish it together." He helped her to her feet just as a figure emerged from the darkness ahead of them. Anna's heart lurched, thinking it was one of Mercer's men, but the approaching rider wore no uniform and carried himself with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "This way," the stranger called softly, and Anna recognized the voice of Joseph Running Elk. The Apache warrior had somehow obtained a horse and now offered his hand to help Anna mount. "Red Horse sent me," he explained as Caleb swung up behind her. "Said you might need a guide to reach the white man's town." They rode hard through the darkness, leaving the sounds of battle behind them. Joseph seemed to know every rock and gully in the territory, guiding them along paths that existed more in memory than in any visible reality. As dawn broke, they found themselves on a ridge overlooking the sprawling settlement of Tucson. The town lay spread out below them like a promise of civilization, with its adobe buildings and tree-lined streets offering the hope of safety at last. "The newspaper office," Anna said, pointing toward a building near the town center. "We need to find Sarah McKenna." They rode into Tucson as the town was beginning to stir with morning activity. Merchants opening their shops, women drawing water from wells, children playing in dusty streets. After days in the wilderness, the sights and sounds of normal life seemed almost surreal. The Tucson Herald occupied a small building on the main street, its windows bright with morning sunlight. Anna could see people moving around inside, preparing the day's edition. Joseph helped her down from the horse, then melted back into the crowd with the silent efficiency of his people. Anna and Caleb approached the newspaper office, both of them acutely aware of how they must look after their ordeal. Their clothes were torn and stained with blood and smoke, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and hunger. but the document bag remained intact, its contents representing their only hope of justice. The woman who answered their knock was perhaps 30 years old, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical dress suitable for working in a print shop, and ink stains on her fingers marked her as someone who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty in pursuit of a story. "Miss McKenna?" Anna asked hesitantly. "That's right," the woman replied, studying them with professional curiosity. "And you are people who have information about Colonel Mercer's operations," Anna said simply. "Information that someone tried very hard to keep from reaching you." Sarah McKenna's expression sharpened with interest. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let them enter. "I think we need to talk." The newspaper office was a chaos of papers, printing equipment, and half-finished articles. McKenna led them to a small office in the back, closing the door behind them for privacy. "I've been investigating Mercer for months," she said without preamble, "but so far all I have are rumors and hearsay. If you have proof—" Anna opened the document bag and began laying out papers on McKenna's desk. Letters, ledgers, contracts, maps, the entire documented history of Mercer's slave empire spread out like an accusation. McKenna's eyes widened as she began reading. "Dear God," she breathed. This is everything. Names, dates, financial records. How did you get this?" "We stole it," Anna said simply. "From his office at Eagle Crest right before we burned the place to the ground." "You destroyed Eagle Crest?" McKenna looked up in amazement. "The reports say it was an Apache raid." "It was," Caleb said with grim satisfaction. "We just happened to be working with the Apache at the time." McKenna continued reading through the documents, her excitement growing with each revelation. This correspondence with Senator Hamilton, these military supply contracts, the bribes to territorial judges, this isn't just a story, it's the story of the decade. "Can you get it published?" Anna asked. "Before Mercer has a chance to cover his tracks." "Published." McKenna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, I'm going to do more than publish this. I'm going to telegraph copies to every major newspaper between here and Washington. By tomorrow morning, this story will be on the front page of papers from San Francisco to New York." As if summoned by her words, the sound of horses in the street outside made them all freeze. Anna moved to the window and peered through the shutters, her heart sinking as she saw what was approaching. Colonel Mercer sat his horse in the middle of the street, flanked by a dozen of his surviving men. His uniform was torn and dirty from the night's fighting, and his face bore the cold fury of a man who had been pushed beyond his limits. "Seems your friend found us," Caleb observed, checking his pistol. "Back door," Anna asked McKenna. "Blocked," the journalist replied, looking out another window. "He's got men positioned all around the building." Mercer's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Miss McKenna, I know you're in there, and I know you have stolen property that belongs to me. Send it out along with the thieves who took it, and I might let you live." McKenna looked at Anna and Caleb with newfound respect. "You two really have him rattled, don't you?" "He's got good reason to be worried," Anna said, gathering up the scattered documents. "These papers could destroy him and half the territorial government." "Then we better make sure they get where they need to go," McKenna said with grim determination. She moved to a large safe in the corner of her office, quickly stuffing the most important documents inside. "Even if something happens to us, my editor has instructions to publish anything found in this safe if I turn up dead or missing." The front door of the building exploded inward as Mercer's men forced their way inside. Heavy footsteps echoed through the newspaper office as they searched for their quarry. "In here," McKenna whispered, leading them toward a narrow staircase that led to the building's second floor. "There's a way onto the roof from upstairs." They climbed quickly, hearing Mercer's voice growing closer as he personally directed the search. The second floor was cramped and hot, filled with stored newsprint and old equipment. McKenna led them to a ladder that provided access to a roof hatch. "Where does this lead?" Caleb asked as they climbed. "Next building over is the hotel," McKenna replied. "If we can get across the rooftops." They emerged onto the flat roof of the newspaper building, just as the sound of splintering wood indicated that Mercer's men had found the safe. Anna could hear the colonel's furious cursing as he discovered that the most important documents were beyond his reach. The hotel roof was only 6 feet away across a narrow alley, but it was a treacherous jump with Anna's injured ankle. Caleb went first, landing heavily but safely on the opposite building. McKenna followed with the agility of someone accustomed to taking risks. Anna gathered herself for the leap, knowing that failure meant falling 2 stories to the alley below. She launched herself across the gap, her injured ankle buckling as she landed. Only Caleb's quick reflexes kept her from tumbling over the edge. "There!" a voice shouted from below, and Anna looked down to see one of Mercer's men pointing up at them from the alley. They ran across the hotel roof looking for another way down. The building's fire escape was on the far side, facing away from the newspaper office where Mercer's main force was concentrated. As they climbed down the iron ladder, Anna could hear commotion from the street as Mercer repositioned his men to cut off their escape. But the fire escape deposited them in a back alley that offered multiple routes into the maze of Tucson's side streets. "This way," McKenna said, leading them toward the busier part of town where they might lose themselves in the crowd. They had made it perhaps 2 blocks when the sound of galloping hooves made them duck into the doorway of a general store. Mercer himself rode past, his face twisted with rage as he searched for any sign of his quarry. "He's not going to give up," Anna observed. "He can't afford to," McKenna agreed, "but he's also operating outside his authority here. Tucson has its own law enforcement, and they don't take kindly to armed men terrorizing citizens." As if summoned by her words, the sound of a sheriff's whistle echoed through the streets. Anna peered around the corner to see a man wearing a badge approaching Mercer with obvious suspicion. "You Colonel Mercer?" the lawman asked. "I'm Sheriff Sullivan. Got reports of armed men threatening civilians in my town." Anna's heart leaped with recognition. This was the honest sheriff Caleb had mentioned, the one they had originally planned to seek out for help. "Sheriff, these people are dangerous fugitives," Mercer said smoothly, his manner suddenly becoming reasonable and official. "They've committed arson and theft, and I'm here under territorial authority to apprehend them." "That's so," Sullivan replied, his tone skeptical. "Funny thing is, I haven't received any official notifications about fugitives in my jurisdiction. You wouldn't happen to have the proper paperwork, would you?" Anna saw her chance. While Mercer was distracted by the sheriff, she stepped out of her hiding place and walked directly toward the 2 men. "Sheriff Sullivan," she called out, "I'm Anna Hayes, and I need to report a crime." Mercer's hand dropped to his pistol, but Sullivan was faster, stepping between them with his own weapon drawn. "Hold it right there, Colonel. In my town, we settle disputes with law, not gunfire." "Sheriff, that woman is a wanted criminal," Mercer protested. "Maybe so," Sullivan said, "but she's also a citizen with the right to speak her piece. Ma'am, what crime are you reporting?" Anna took a deep breath, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. "I'm reporting slavery, Sheriff. Kidnapping, murder, and the systematic enslavement of nearly 200 people at a mining operation called Eagle Crest." Sullivan's eyebrows rose, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am. You have any proof?" "I have ledgers, correspondence, financial records, and witness testimony," Anna said firmly. "Everything you need to prosecute not just Colonel Mercer, but a network of corruption that reaches all the way to Washington." "She's lying," Mercer interjected. "She's a disturbed woman with delusions of persecution. I was trying to help her when she turned violent." Sullivan studied both of them carefully, his experienced eyes taking in their appearances, their body language, the desperation in Mercer's voice versus the calm certainty in Anna's. "Tell you what," he said finally. "Why don't we all go to my office and sort this out properly, Colonel? I'll need to see your territorial authorization. Miss Hayes, I'll need to examine your evidence, then we'll get to the bottom of this." "I don't have time for bureaucratic nonsense," Mercer said, his composure beginning to crack. "Those people are dangerous fugitives, and I'm taking them into custody right now." "No, sir, you're not," Sullivan said firmly, his hand still resting on his gun. "Not in my town, not without proper paperwork, and not without due process. You got a problem with that, you can take it up with the territorial governor." For a moment, Anna thought Mercer might actually draw his weapon and try to shoot his way out of the situation. His face was flushed with fury, and she could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. But then McKenna appeared from around the corner, accompanied by several other townspeople who had been drawn by the commotion. Among them was a man wearing a suit and carrying a notebook, another journalist, Anna realized. "Sheriff Sullivan," McKenna called out. "I'm Sarah McKenna from the Herald. This woman and her companion have just provided me with documented evidence of the largest slave operation in territorial history. I think you need to hear what they have to say." The presence of witnesses and journalists seemed to deflate Mercer's aggressive posture. He was still dangerous, but he could no longer act with impunity in front of so many observers. "Sheriff," Anna said quietly, "there are still people trapped in Colonel Mercer's other mining operations. Every hour we waste arguing is another hour they spend in chains." Sullivan nodded slowly. "All right, Miss Hayes, let's go to my office and you can show me what you've got. Colonel, you're welcome to accompany us, but your men stay outside. I won't have armed mercenaries intimidating witnesses in my jurisdiction." The walk to the sheriff's office became a strange procession. Anna and Caleb walked beside Sullivan, while Mercer followed with obvious reluctance. McKenna and the other journalist trailed behind, taking notes and asking questions that Mercer refused to answer. At the sheriff's office, Anna spread out the documents on Sullivan's desk, while McKenna provided copies she had made before hiding the originals. The evidence was overwhelming ledgers documenting the purchase and sale of human beings' correspondence, revealing the network of corruption maps showing the locations of multiple slave camps. Sullivan examined each document carefully, his expression growing darker with every revelation. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, looking at a letter that detailed the planned assassination of McKenna. This is monstrous." "It's also actionable," McKenna added. "I've already sent telegrams to newspapers in Santa Fe, Denver, and San Francisco. By tomorrow, this story will be national news." Mercer had grown increasingly pale as the evidence mounted against him. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "The territory needs these operations. The mines produce wealth, create jobs, contribute to economic development. A few sacrifices are necessary for the greater good." "Sacrifices?" Anna turned on him with fury. "You call enslaving children sacrifices. You call working people to death in your mines economic development. You're naive, Ben," Mercer shot back. "This territory is built on the backs of the strong, taking what they need from the weak. That's how civilization advances." "No," Sheriff Sullivan said firmly, standing up from his desk. "That's how monsters justify their crimes. Colonel Mercer, I'm placing you under arrest for kidnapping, murder conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise." Mercer's hand moved toward his gun, but Caleb was ready. The former cavalry officer had positioned himself behind Mercer's chair, and his pistol was pressed against the colonel's neck before the man could draw. "I wouldn't," Caleb said quietly. "You've caused enough suffering for one lifetime." Sullivan cuffed Mercer while McKenna and the other journalist documented every moment. Outside, Anna could hear the colonel's men arguing with deputy sheriffs who had arrived to maintain order. "What happens now?" Anna asked as they watched Mercer being led to a jail cell. "Now we round up his associates," Sullivan said grimly. "These documents give us enough evidence to arrest half the territorial government. It's going to be the biggest scandal in the history of the Southwest. And the people still trapped in his other camps. We'll organize rescue operations immediately," Sullivan promised. "I'll coordinate with the territorial marshal and the army. Those people will be free within the week." Anna felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had carried for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to live without it. After 3 years of captivity, months of planning and days of desperate flight justice was finally within reach. McKenna approached her with a warm smile. "Miss Hayes, I want to personally thank you for what you've done. This story is going to change everything, not just in Arizona, but across the entire frontier." "It wasn't just me," Anna said, looking at Caleb. "None of this would have been possible without people willing to stand up when it mattered most." Caleb smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was a smile without shadows. "We all did what we had to do," he said simply. As the sun set over Tucson that evening, Anna stood on the porch of the hotel where Sheriff Sullivan had arranged rooms for them. Tomorrow would bring trials, testimony, and the long work of rebuilding lives shattered by Mercer's cruelty. But tonight, for the first time in years, she could sleep without fear. The ledger that had started it all lay on the table beside her bed, its pages filled with the names of people who would soon be free. Joseph Running Elk, the woman who cried for her children, the old man with his Bible verses, all of them would have their chance at liberty. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the town, she knew that Red Horse and his warriors were riding home to their families, carrying word that the evil place built on Apache bones had finally been cleansed by fire. The sparrow had not only escaped its cage, it had torn down the entire structure that had held so many others captive. and in doing so, it had discovered that sometimes the most fragile things turned out to be the strongest of all. Anna Hayes closed her eyes and slept the sleep of the free, while across the territory the first rays of dawn began to shine on a land where slavery could no longer hide in the shadows. The reckoning had come at last.